Good morning, everybody. My name's Wayne Lee. I'm Head of Employee Relations for UK Theatre and SOLT. And thank you for your time in attending this webinar this morning. As indicated, as advertised, it's very much a forum for colleagues who have concerns or questions about the vaccine to ask questions to an NHS practitioner. And I'm very delighted today to be able to welcome Dr. Oge Eluzwe, who works for the NHS and is also a clinical advisor on the COVID-19 vaccination programme, who will seek to answer any questions that you may have regarding concerns about the vaccine. A number of you have, or a number of people have already submitted some questions, and we will work our way through those shortly. But if you have questions that you want to ask as we go through, or supplementary questions as we go through, please seek to do so by entering your question in the chat, which is on the bottom of towards the bottom tab of the screen in front of you. If you click on the bottom, you'll see chat, and if you click on chat, you'll be able to enter your question, and Dr. Oge will seek to answer your questions insofar as you may have any issues about employment. I'll seek to try and answer those, but fundamentally, as I say, this is very much an opportunity for you to be able to ask questions about the vaccine and issues that you may have, or concerns that you may have surrounding it. So we'll start with the questions, but before doing so, Dr. Oge, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we look at the first question?
Just thank you for having me. Thank you for joining. I'm a GP. I was involved in my local vaccination hub and then got involved with the London region vaccination program from April this year. So have hosted lots of these webinars, just having conversations, because people are concerned. It's the first time any of us have experienced a pandemic. So it has been a really anxious, tough time the last 18 months. So happy to be here and answer as many of your questions as we can get through in the next hour. Thank you for having me.
So shall we take the first submitted question, Elisa and Tracy, if you could put that in, if you could show that on the screen, if possible. Bear with me. Well, let me just read that question out for colleagues. And the first question is, can you explain the inflammation of the heart side effects that have been linked by 2 of the vaccines? Heart disease stroke failure runs in my family, so I'm really concerned taking either one, Pfizer and Moderna, as I don't want to up my risk of any heart problem, especially because I have had sight issues in the past with my own heart already. And that question is now in the chat box.
So thank you for that question. So yes, we have seen a slightly increased risk, particular in younger age groups, so younger men and some young female teenagers as well, and young 20s, of a condition called myocarditis, inflammation of the muscle around your heart, or pericarditis, which is inflammation of the lining around the heart. Very, very small, tiny numbers compared to the numbers of people who have been vaccinated. There is no current evidence to suggest that if you have a background or family history of heart problems, you are more at risk of this very, very rare side effects. So definitely the benefits of vaccination outweigh that potential tiny risk. Like I said, if you have a background of heart problems, there's no evidence that it will increase your risk. And in fact, the benefits of vaccination are even more pronounced if you have a chronic condition like a heart condition. So our recommendation will be proceed and get the vaccination. We do have 3 vaccines currently available. It's an amazing position to be in the UK. So we have Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. But if you're over 40, we're recommending that you go ahead and book with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine.
Thank you. So if we move on to the second question that was submitted, and again, if colleagues can see that in the chat box there, but I will read it out just in case you're having difficulties accessing the box. What do you have to say about the estimated 1,559 deaths and 1.135 million adverse effects when after taking the vaccine in the UK? And in its adds in brackets, this only accounts for 1 to 10% of the figures. And therefore, why am I being forced into taking something that is a risk of death and injury to continue in my field of work?
So, really good question. I think we have to, as always, look at the whole picture. So if you remember, we all had those awful statistics of how many deaths with COVID, with a documented positive test for COVID in the last 28 days. And at the moment, that figure stands at, I believe, over 137,000 people have died with COVID infection since the pandemic starts. That's just in the UK. And that's millions and millions and millions of infection. And that doesn't count for the numbers that are experiencing very severe comorbidity from having severe infection. So being in ITU, being in hospital, they're long-term conditions that we're finding out more and more about. Post-COVID-19 syndrome, or long COVID, is a thing that we're going to be treating for many years and potentially decades to come. So COVID infection itself has very significant adverse effects and complications and risk of death. We have vaccinated over 76 million people in the UK. We've given 76 million doses of this vaccine in the UK alone, many more millions globally. So even though nothing is without risk, even taking paracetamol tablets, and there is increased scrutiny over this vaccine because it's new. And like I said, we're in a pandemic. So there's increased scrutiny and information. So we're getting more information all the time. People are encouraged to report adverse effects. We have the yellow card reporting system in the UK. So the MHRA, which is a regulatory body, is collecting data on the side effects from the vaccine that people submitted. So they're looking for potential patterns that may be linked to the vaccine. Definitely a few people have had really severe side effects. We heard just in the news, the inquest open and that young lady who died after the AstraZeneca of this really rare blood clot that has been noted and we know is a potential very rare side effect. But like everything, you have to balance the risks with the potential benefits, and the benefits of vaccination and protection against this awful virus that causes awful things. Even if you don't die, it can cause severe complications that take a long time to get over. So the benefits of being vaccinated and protected against COVID far outweigh the potential risks from the very severe side effects. A tiny, tiny minority of people may have the risk of death and injury, as you say, compared to the risk of getting COVID and being severely affected from that. And that is why, as a society, as the NHS, as health professionals, we strongly recommend getting vaccinated to protect yourself.
Thank you. And just picking up on the latter part of that question, why people being forced to work. The position of SOLT in UK Theatre is, as I said at the beginning, none of us believed or imagined we would find ourselves in the position we were in. This isn't suddenly SOLT in UK Theatre saying, oh, let's go make everybody get vaccinated. It's very much a case of the medical advice, as Dr. Oge has just outlined, is very, very strong in favour of vaccination. SOLT and UK Theatre encourage people to be vaccinated. Similarly, all the trade unions encourage their members to seek vaccination, but nobody is forcing you. Where there is an issue for SOLT members and UK Theatre members is the impact on their productions in the event that people are not vaccinated in contact COVID, or if they're not vaccinated and come into contact with somebody who has COVID, they're unable to attend the production. That has in economic implications for them, economic implications for the production. And as a consequence of that, that puts at risk the sustainability of that production and the sustainability of their jobs in that production. Moreover, in some more extreme instances, such as foreign tours even just over the water, as it were, to the Republic of Ireland, the Irish government is currently requiring people to be vaccinated. Otherwise, they're required to undergo quarantine. And in such circumstances, therefore, somebody who wasn't vaccinated would be unable to participate in a tour in the Republic of Ireland. So what I'm saying is SOLT and UK Theatre obviously supports seeks to encourage people to follow the medical advice that's being given. But equally, it is saying to people, look, we are not making you have a vaccine, but there are certain circumstances whereby it becomes very, very difficult for you and for us in the event that you've not been vaccinated. If you can't, if you don't want to be vaccinated, or if you have some issues with vaccination, then please do discuss those with us, and we'll seek to come to a position or seek to resolve it. But ultimately, the push, as it were, the requirement to be vaccinated is driven by circumstances beyond SALT members and UK Theatre members' control. But equally, there is that very, very strong support for colleagues to undergo vaccination. So if we now move on to the next question. What do you advise the Pfizer? Why do you advise the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine for the over 40s? I have had both AstraZeneca jabs and I am 58. Should I be concerned?
Apologies. So at the moment, the current guidance is we have 3 vaccines available in the UK: Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. The current guidance, if you're under 40 or if you're pregnant as well, because we have the most data, you should proceed with Pfizer and Moderna for under 40. If you're over 40, you can have any of the 3 vaccinations. So most people have had AstraZeneca, even under 40s, have had AstraZeneca, no complications, no side effects. They're protected from vaccination, no problem. It was an extra precaution because of the very rare side effects of the blood clots, and it's slightly more common in the younger age group. We noted that the recommendation was to have an alternative to AstraZeneca if available, if you're under 40. So apologies if I said over 40 a bit earlier. Great that you've had both AstraZeneca jabs, absolutely fine, absolutely safe, absolutely effective. Thank you.
So moving on to the next question now, how many jabs are expected? How many jabs are people expected to have, as there's already a 3rd booster coming into place in a year or two? Is there going to be a 4th, a 5th booster shot?
So good question. We're in a pandemic. Information is evolving all the time. Every year we have a seasonal flu vaccination, because one thing that we know about viruses, all viruses, is that they evolve, they adapt. And we've already heard about the different variants that have emerged throughout the last year. At the moment, it's the Delta variant that is prevalent in the UK. In January, it was the Alpha variant. So it's in the biology of viruses to adapt and mutate and change. So sometimes vaccines, and every year, I'm a GP, we have a seasonal flu campaign every year, and we adapt the vaccination to try to attack the flu that's circulating each season. So at the moment, we don't know if we're going to do that for COVID vaccination. The JVCI have preliminarily recommended that we vaccinate the most vulnerable. So the people who are really immunosuppressed. So people going through chemotherapy, people with immunosuppressed on medication, really strong immunosuppressant medication. The idea is that because the vaccine stimulates an immune response. So if you're immunosuppressed, the worry is that you may not have stimulated as strong an immune response to protect you from COVID infection. So the recommendation would be for us to do a booster campaign to boost the immunity of those most vulnerable people. And we should be starting that in the next few weeks. More information about if they want us to boost the immunity of other at-risk groups will emerge. So we're waiting for formal JVCI guidance on that. But in terms of every year, are we needing to have a COVID booster in the same way we have flu season? And we at the moment vaccinate the most at risk, or the older population, against flu. And we're also vaccinating school children and 2- and 3-year-olds against flu. So that will emerge with more information in coming years. But for now, the booster has been recommended for the most vulnerable. And at the moment, that's the immunosuppressed population.
Thank you. And there's just a related question just come in now, okay. It says, I have had both doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, but I'm required to get a 3rd dose due to being immune suppressed. I am under 40, so what vaccine would I get for my 3rd dose?
Really good question. So again, we're waiting for JVCI recommendation and confirmation of which dose we're going to boost people with. Probably there's studies going on to say the heterologous approach. So if you had your first 2 doses with Astra, should you be offered Pfizer or Moderna for the third booster if you're eligible for that, and vice versa. So we'll have that confirmed in the next few weeks. Probably if you're under 40, if you've had the current guidance, if you're under 40 and you had a first dose of AstraZeneca and you didn't suffer from any of the really severe side effects, in particular the weird blood clots we saw in very few people, you can proceed and have the second dose safely with AstraZeneca. But for the third booster, we're waiting for formal guidance on if that will be, or that should be with a different vaccine. And it also depends on availability of vaccines as well.
Thank you. And again, it's almost a follow on these questions, aren't they? Very well, quite well linked. If I'm already susceptible to blood clots due to an existing health condition, is it still encouraged for me to take the vaccine, considering the fact that although rare, it's still a possible side effect?
So generally, no matter what your age, the benefits of vaccination in protecting you against the serious consequences of COVID that we've already discussed do outweigh any risk of this extremely rare condition. The blood clots that were seen that were vaccine related were really unusual, related to, platelets, related to other things. So very specific to a vaccine mediated response. So it's not linked to general blood clots we see. So blood clots that you may have had after surgery, people who are heavy smokers or very overweight, or even on the contraceptive pill are at increase of clots. But these aren't the clots that were seen after the vaccine. Currently, the idea is we do ask questions about what your history are before we vaccinate you. So very, very few people have these severe side effects. So you'll be asked those questions, but most people are safe to proceed with vaccination. If you're over 40, any of the three, under 40, the two vaccines we've already talked about. So vast majority of people, we asked the questions in hubs, people were worried about the blood clots, but vast majority can proceed and have the vaccine safely, even with a family history of certain blood clots.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question. I'm 7 months pregnant. This is after years of IVF, and I am in my 40s. So I am anxious to take as few risks as possible. My understanding is that there is no data at all in regards to whether the COVID vaccine could adversely affect my child in the years after it is born. Please, can you let me know if this is correct? And how much mid and long-term data is there compared to how much there usually is before a vaccine is given the go-ahead? And if there is not much, why is it deemed safe for me to have the vaccine? Could you also let me know if with COVID numbers as they are at the moment in the country, you think it would be, sorry, just scrolling down. You think it is likely that an unvaccinated person can avoid getting the virus in the next few months? Thanks so much for your advice.
Thank you for that really important questions. Many congratulations on your pregnancy. So the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists do state that these are new vaccines. So we don't have 5 or 10-year studies to affect long-term effects. But please remember, we've been vaccinating pregnant women against infectious disease for a long time. So even though the COVID-19 vaccines are new, vaccination against infectious disease is not new. We vaccinate pregnant women every year against flu, influenza. We vaccinate pregnant women to protect their babies against whooping cough. And we've been doing that for many years now. So, and we have observational studies, something called V-Safe register, based in America. So at the beginning of this campaign back in December, when we first started vaccinating, we did ask people if they were pregnant or planning on being pregnant. We weren't vaccinating them at that point. Not that we thought that it was unsafe, but we don't openly include pregnant women in the initial studies. But since then, because there's been so many people vaccinated, and also we track people that were involved in the initial trials, and lots of women subsequently discovered they were pregnant, so they were tracked. Other women have reported getting the vaccine, not knowing they're pregnant, and then discovering they're pregnant, and they've been tracked. So over 130,000 women were tracked in that way, before pregnancy, pregnant, after pregnancy, and no long-term effects. So this was since the trials. So this is, we're talking early last year. So we have that much information so far, and no safety concerns at all. And actually, we know COVID infection itself is more risky for pregnant women, especially in that third trimester. We have critical care beds filled with women who need oxygen, and the impact that has on pregnancy, the increased rate of preterm delivery, and problems for mum and baby. So our firm recommendation now is that this vaccine is safe in pregnancy. Please proceed and protect yourself from COVID infection, which with the rates, the second part of your question, the rates as high as they are at the moment, 37,000 a day, I believe I saw yesterday, there is a chance of catching COVID, a higher chance of catching COVID infection, and it is higher if you're not vaccinated. So being pregnant, being in your 7th month, we would really firmly recommend you proceed and get vaccinated and protect yourself against COVID infection, severe COVID infection in particular, which we know is more risky in the latter stages of pregnancy.
Thank you. And somebody's just put on a link to the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and their advice and information regarding the vaccine during pregnancy, for somebody wants to link onto that subsequently. So moving on to the next question. Have that one on, please. So this is a reference to the government UK website, where it says people who have COVID-19 can infect others from around 2 days before symptoms start and for up to 10 days after. They can pass the infection to others even if they have mild symptoms or no symptoms at all, which is why they must stay at home. So the questioner asks, what about symptoms after 10 days? Will you have to put forward a negative test before you stop isolating? If not, how can you be sure that a person testing positive with symptoms cannot spread COVID-19?
So yes, the information has felt confusing at times for people. And even as a GP, we get people every day on our triage list asking questions like this. So the incubation period and the infectivity period is thought to be around that 10 days period, which is why that's the advice after a positive contact or a positive test. So if you develop symptoms even after 10 days, you should get a test. So the current criteria for a test is a fever, a new continuous cough, or adaptations to taste and smell. Some people talk about really congested, feeling sinusy and congested, and there are lots of other symptoms of COVID as well. So if you're worried, get a test. Tests are now so freely available, and I'd say the PCR test that you send off to the lab. If you don't have symptoms, some of us, for me in the NHS, I'm doing twice weekly lateral flow tests at home to just generally screen if you don't have symptoms. But if we're worried or you have a contact, we're sending off a proper PCR test. So I'd say that if you think you need to self-isolate for longer, if you get symptoms whilst self-isolating, then just err on the side of caution. And the current guidance as well says that people who are 2 weeks after their second COVID jab may no longer need to isolate. So there are lots of practical benefits to vaccination, as well as protecting yourself and others from the most serious effects of COVID.
Thank you. Somebody's asking about the ingredients, the contents of the vaccine. What's actually in them? Yeah,
so it's on the gov.uk site. So I'm hoping someone will. I can find the link to post. So the list of ingredients are there. Lots of long names. I mean, they're ingredients that are common to lots of vaccination. What I'd say is that the Pfizer and Moderna, which is the mRNA vaccine, there's a lipids kind of protection layer around the instructions that tell our cells to make the spike protein, which is what is present on the surface of the COVID virus itself. And it's what stimulates our immune cells to build up an army so they're ready to go if they were to see the COVID virus again in future. In the sense of the AstraZeneca, it's a modified adenovirus that then, has the spike protein on the surface and again trains up your own immune cells to fight against COVID infection if it was to see it again. So what I would say is the idea of vaccination, and this is vaccination, we've been vaccinating people against infectious diseases for a very long time. It's the single most beneficial public health outreach that has saved countless lives over generations. And the idea of it is to teach your own immune cells to recognize the infectious disease and have the army ready to go to tackle it, so it's not so much of a problem and doesn't cause such severe illness if you were to come across the infection. So the ingredients are listed on a dove.uk site, the full ingredients of all the vaccinations. I'll find the link and put it in the chat. There is nothing hidden here, really. It is similar in terms of other diseases we've been vaccinating against. Thank you for posting the information on the chat. I see someone's done that for AstraZeneca, and the same is available for Pfizer and Moderna.
Thank you. Just moving back to a question, somebody's asked concerning the reliability of lateral flow tests, and how likely is it to receive a false positive stroke negative, to receive a false?
The likelihood of a false negative is probably higher than the likelihood of a false positive. So the lateral flow tests are supposed to be for asymptomatic, so you don't have symptoms, you feel fine. It's done as a screening, as an extra precaution for, I think kids are doing it for school purposes. I'm doing it in healthcare, so doctors and even my receptionists are doing it twice a week. So if you were to receive a positive lateral flow test, the recommendation is you isolate and you ask for a confirmatory PCR test, which you can order online. You can order a kit to come to the house to send off to a lab, and the PCR test is the most sensitive and the most accurate. If it's negative and you don't have symptoms, it's unlikely that you're infected at the time. But if you have any concern or you have any worries, then I would proceed and get a PCR test, which is more accurate. If you have symptoms, I would say don't do a lateral flow test, proceed and book a PCR test. So lots of people are making that mistake. They have symptoms, they do a lateral flow, they're reassured with a negative result. I would say, please go ahead and get a PCR test if you have any symptoms that you're worried may be linked to COVID-19 infection.
Thank you. There has been a question come up alternatively in the chat from somebody regarding the employment aspects, and I'll just jump in and answer that one, and then we can proceed on the medical side. Somebody's asked, I understand theatre company concerns. However, with all due respect, I personally believe it is incomparable to personal concerns about side effects, as well as freedom of choice. Are jobs at risk of being retracted if one chooses not to have the vaccine, or are production companies willing to make something work, e.g. regular testing? Well, recapping what I said earlier, production companies are very keen to encourage people to have the vaccine for the reasons that I've outlined. If people decline to have the vaccine, there is a possibility that they will be unable to be engaged because, as I've said, they may not be able to go on tour, or there may be other implications. That being said, however, there is no carte blanche, no way, no how. If there is an issue, if you have concerns about the vaccine and you are being engaged by or are already engaged by a production company, then you should voice those concerns and have a discussion with the managers concerned, and then that will be resolved through those discussions. I don't know the outcome of those discussions, but obviously the balance of your concerns and the balance of their concerns need to be taken into account and a reasonable position concluded. That doesn't mean to say it will be reached in an agreed position. It may possibly result in employment not being proceeded with, but equally it may not. I think what I've been saying to colleagues all across, whether it's manager colleagues or whether it's colleagues being engaged, is very much depend. Each case very much depend on each individual circumstance of the individual and the circumstances of the actual nature of the engagement, what the production is like, where it's going, what's required, are there workarounds. So it's all, I say, it's very much each case on its merits, but fundamentally underlying this is Oge says, it's a societal concerns and encouragement for the benefits and the mutual benefit of us all to seek the vaccine. For production companies, it's a case of very much supporting that, but that is also overladen by the concerns of making the production sustainable and able to continue. So as I say, it's very much each case on its merits, very much dependent on the particular issues or difficulties that the person may have in having a vaccine. So each case on its merits is what I would say, and I would encourage everybody to have a discussion in the event that they have those concerns. So moving on, and as I say, I do want to emphasize that this is very much about people's gain understanding in further information, from Dr. Oge's, whose answers I think have been most expansive and informative. So let's try and focus on those. So moving on to one of those questions, somebody's asked, as someone who is immune suppressed, how protected am I after 2 doses?
So 2 doses, great to hear that hopefully you've had the 2 doses. Some protection is better than no protection. So it doesn't mean that immunosuppressed people can't mount a response, and every situation is very individual. But generally speaking, the immune response mounted, even if immunosuppressed, is good. So 2 doses better than 1 dose for everyone, even those who aren't immunosuppressed. So you are protected after 2 doses. It's about certain eligible people who are very immunosuppressed. As an extra layer of protection, the recommendation is to have that booster dose, and more information will come out. But definitely you're protected after the 2 doses that is currently recommended.
This next question is, I'm not, look, I don't know the details about people who have objected to these vaccines on a range of ethical grounds, but someone's asking the question is, if they're a vegan, what about those? Well, again, as I say, I'd go back to what I said before, have discussions with the managers, and it will depend very much on the circumstances. I mean,
but I can jump in there. The vaccine. So for instance, I hosted a pop-up clinic in a Seventh-day Adventist church, and they're very much vegetarian, vegan, and we're very concerned about the ingredients. And they've done extensive research, and their preference was for the Pfizer vaccine. All the vaccines, there's no animal products are used in any of the vaccines. So all of them are said to be fine if you are vegan or vegetarian. But just to say, this group of people, their preference was for Pfizer. So that was just some extra information I said I'll put in there. So there is no reason. Most vegans have proceeded and had the vaccine very safely, and there are no animal products in the vaccines.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have a further question. It's one. Let me just pick up one from this that was submitted early on. Rather than waste medicine, why isn't there an antibody test done before you push for the vaccine?
So good question. The antibody tests that people have done, some have done an antibody test to see if they already have antibodies that we know can potentially protect, but we don't know enough about if having an antibody is enough protection, just the presence of antibodies. And we know that the vaccine-mediated immunity after vaccination is very strong and very effective. So that's why the recommendation is, even if you've had COVID, even if you've done a test and you have antibodies, still please get the 2 vaccines, because we know generally that offers great effective protection. So it isn't about, resource-wise, maybe with more information will transpire about who needs to be vaccinated or booster in coming years. But right now, the main aim is we want to get the risk of COVID being a problem right down. The vaccination program is thought to have prevented over 4 million infections, over 100,000 deaths. So we know it is safe, we know it's effective. We have really high case numbers at the moment, actually. And you may even know people who have had 2 doses of the vaccine who have proceeded to get COVID infection and who have to isolate, etc. But the risk of severe infection is so much more reduced. The numbers of people unwell in hospital when they're vaccinated are negligible. The people in hospital unwell are largely unvaccinated. So that's why we're saying, for generally speaking, the vaccinations protect against severe illness from COVID. And we want COVID to not be the problem it's been for the last 18 months. We all want this pandemic over and done with. And vaccination is one of the ways out of it.
Thank you. Somebody's asked, are the tests conducted to discover if each person has a natural COVID-19 immunity before the vaccine is administered? And are the results taken into account with respect to a person's public exposure status and need to have the vaccine? So somebody's asking, if I have natural immunity, why do I need the vaccine?
Yeah. And it's a question that people have been asking, but at the moment, we're not conducting specific antibody tests to say this person can have the vaccine or this person needs or this person doesn't. The recommendation, even if you've had COVID infection, even if you've done a test to show you have antibodies, the recommendation is to proceed and have vaccination with the 2 doses at the moment. So the idea is just about boosting that immunity. If you like, having COVID, some would say it's like a first dose of immunity, then the vaccine, the 2 vaccines boosts it further. And it's just about increasing your protection from this infection. And the more protection, the better. There is no evidence that having the vaccine after having COVID infection is dangerous in any way. It's just about protecting you from further future infection and potential complications from things like long COVID, and also reducing the risk of transmission. Even though we know if you're vaccinated, you can still get COVID, you can potentially still transmit it, but that risk is reduced if you're vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. So again, it's about looking at that risk-benefit balance.
Thank you. I think we're coming to the end, unless anybody's going to post any more questions. I think we've dealt with most of them. There's one last one. What will you do if I react adversely to the vaccine and cannot work in the industry again? I think this goes back to as Dr. Oge has outlined, the issue of risk and the onset of risk, and the risk of contracting COVID is far, far greater, I would suggest, Dr. Oge, than the risk of an adverse reaction from the vaccine.
Yeah, I'd agree. The risk of getting COVID and having a complication or potentially long-term sequelae from COVID infection itself is higher at the moment with the case rates they are than the potential risk of side effects from the vaccine. And remember, vaccination from infectious disease is not a new phenomenon. We've been doing it for an age. This is another awful infectious disease. I know it's new. I know it's a pandemic. I know there's been so much information thrown around, but I would just urge people to go back to the basics of what infectious disease is and how we as a society have tried to protect ourselves from infectious diseases for generations. And vaccination, even though technology can shift and emerge and grow, is not new. The mRNA technology that we say, people feel like it's come out the blue. It's stuff that was used in research for the Ebola vaccine, and it's also stuff that's been used in cancer research. So it's not new technology as such, it's just used in a really innovative, quite amazing and effective way in vaccinating against COVID. So everyone collaborated, there were resources put behind to come up with these vaccines. So even though it feels like it all happened so quickly, it's really evidence of what happens where there's a will, there's a way. There was political will, there was global will, there was financial will, and there was collaboration between companies. And it ended up with, really effective and safe vaccinations for us.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I think that's a good point on which to end. And unless there's anything else you'd wish to add as a final point, Dr. Oge.
I mean, there were a few other brief questions in just that people had talking about, these aren't live vaccines. It doesn't include COVID, but people may feel unwell after the vaccine. The minor side effects, sore arm, achy. Some people, had period problems. There were side effects lots and lots of side effects reported. But again, you have to balance that. Those self-limiting in the vast majority of cases, mild, and they resolve within a few days compared to the potential side effects of complications from COVID. And generally speaking, you have to think about the vaccine stimulating your immune system. It's building that army, and it's about all those other things to protect your immune system. So vitamin D, eating as well as possible, getting your exercise, making sure you're keeping well, emotional well-being, mental well-being, as well as physical well-being. All those steps are important as well. It's not one or the other, but vaccination is a really powerful, really safe, really effective mechanism that we have to protect ourselves against this awful COVID-19 virus and for us to get out of the pandemic. And I'm really looking forward to going back to theatre. We've all missed our live performances. It's a big part of people feeling good and well-being. So we're really looking forward to things getting back more to normal. And vaccination is a major way to get there. So thank you for all your questions.
And thank you for your fulsome answers to them. I found very, very informative and very helpful. I'm sure everybody else on this call has too. And we're very grateful for your time, and obviously very grateful for the work that you and your colleagues continue to do in this area. So with that, we'll end the webinar here, everybody. And thank you very much indeed for your time and for your attendance today. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.